Tonight with us, we have Albert Tenuta and Tracy Bowdy joining us. Albert is the field crop extension plant pathologist with OMAFRA based in Ridgetown. His areas of focus with OMAFRA include pathology for field crops, including emerging issues, control strategies, and new technologies in pathology, and collaborating on applied research and demonstration projects to validate and determine practical disease management solutions. He also helps with a number of publications and other organizations such as the Crop Protection Network. Tracy Bowdy is also with us tonight, and she's a field crop entomologist with OMAFRA, also based out of Ridgetown. Her areas of focus include collaboration on applied research and demonstration projects to validate, determine the practical integrated insect management solutions, and to monitor for and implement strategies for new invasive species that might be coming into the area. She also helps with a number of publications and other organizations such as she also helps with the Canadian Corn Pest Coalition. And for those who aren't familiar with that, the Corn Pest Coalition is a collaborative group of corn experts promoting the proper stewardship of corn pest management technologies. So tonight we have Albert beginning the discussions on disease and what to look out for this upcoming summer. If you have questions, just a reminder to post them in the chat, or there's going to be time afterwards for questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura and Marty, for that introduction. And that hopefully you can see my screen. It's there. Perfect. Yes, as Laura mentioned, I'm going to be talking about diseases and what to look for or what's up in 2021 in terms of diseases and that. The big one, of course, that we've had a lot of conversation over the past year or two and over the winter and then into last fall or last September, around September 20th, when tar spot in corn was first detected in Ontario in the Ridgetown area. Since then, we've seen it in Essex, Middlesex, Lambton, as well as Elgin County. It is a disease that likes today's weather, cool, wet, humid conditions, leaf wetness during the evening drives much of the disease. It does overwinter in corn residue. So now that it's here, it will overwinter. And we've actually set up a number of trials in location not far from here that has had the most tar spot with the hope to get some I feel bad saying that, with the hope of getting some tar spot for our trials this upcoming year. One of the issues and why it's gained a lot of attention is the losses that have occurred in the US through the Midwest from Michigan through Iowa in 2018, when there was up to 50 bushels or more lost to tar spot. Where we are right now, don't expect to see tar spot at this point. As we move into July and beyond is when tar spot has been showing itself in the Midwest. So the gray areas here are the traditional areas where we've had tar spot in the past. You can see down here in Florida, it has been already detected over a month ago. I mentioned cooler temperatures. Florida's not cool. It's hot. This disease can survive those hot temperatures. Moisture, rainfall drives, and humidity drives this disease considerably. So over the next 2 to 4 weeks will be our first indication of tar spot. Has traditionally showed up from that early July to mid to late July in the Midwest states. So that would be expected. What to see is these tar spot lesions, small raised round irregular shaped black spots on the leaves. They can also occur on the husk. They can also form what they call this fisheye lesion, where you have the black center with a tan halo around it. So both these leaf symptoms or lesion types can be found on the same plant, and both indicate tar spot as well. This is neighboring Michigan. Marty Chilvers from Michigan State. July 8th, 2018 was when they first detected tar spot in this field in Michigan. And then into late August, you started seeing the disease starting to show more and more and moving up the canopy and taking out more plants. And then by September 2nd, within a 2-week period, considerable amount of disease. And so again, under those cooler, wetter conditions, particular wet conditions, and cooler nighttime temperatures and high humidity and leaf wetness, this disease can progress. It's much like what we see with some of the rust diseases and that as well. So what can we do for this upcoming year? If you're in those 5 counties, likelihood of more of a local inoculum potential is there. A lot of it will depend on, the majority of it will depend on what happens in the US and those spores moving up. There is the tar spot monitoring program through the IPM pipe that I'm part of for this and other diseases that are available. So if you go to the corn IPM pipe, you can see that. Other options within the season is fungicides. And the timing for tar spot is very similar to what we see with our other diseases. That VT to R2, so from tassel to silking, is the same window for most of the diseases that we look at. Also, just like with northern corn leaf blight and other diseases, these mixed modes of fungicides, 2- and 3-way products are more efficacious, work better. And but don't forget, although it's sexy and it's the new thing, tar spot, northern corn leaf blight, gibberella, dawn, are diseases that we see consistently on Ontario, and as we saw in 2018 with the mycotoxin dawn issue, can cause significant heartache to us and significant yields as well, yield losses as well. So keep that in mind. But again, the good news is our general pattern for managing diseases, tar spot falls into that pattern quite well. The other side of the question we get a lot of is, how about what's the influence, the return on investment with fungicides? That as we're approaching now into that V6 to V8 leaf stage, that idea of fungicides with, say, herbicides or early applications, we have not seen that either in Ontario, the US, in our collected data showing a return on investment. Where we do see that is that tassel to that silk application. And here's just a graph assembled over the years from our data as well as US data funded through the Grain Farmers of Ontario, and looking at the return on investment. And we can see we can reach up to 70% return on, on the upper end of the 4 to 5 bushel corn and applications in that 20 to 25 bushels. Now, as we're pushing corn above that 5 and significantly above that 5 bushels, that return also starts to increase, right? So again, although we have a more opportunity to have that return on investment with higher corn prices, remember though, we still want to be targeting those fields that are the highest risk, right? So corn on corn, history of disease in those fields, a susceptible hybrid, all of those things that can increase our return on investment as well. So keep that in mind as we move along. We've been working with the US colleagues in terms of fungicides, both for tar spot, but for our perspective is northern corn leaf blight. I'm going to use my example here. The products I'm going to be talking about work very well against tar spot as well. So this is trials that we do in both susceptible and tolerant corn hybrids. These were done at Ridgetown inoculated trials. Veltima is a new BASF product, which is Ribosol plus Headline. It has performed very well for us over the past few years. It's also performed exceptionally well in terms of the tar spot US work as well. Other products that have done well for us in terms of northern corn leaf blight and can help us in tar spot control include the Miravis Neo, Delero Complete. This was the Stratego Pro that has been changed, Quilt, and others, but primarily these top 5 products here have shown both good control for northern corn leaf blight as well as tar spot. So we have the timing, we have the products, and we have the scouting network available to us to help us manage tar spot in 2021 and beyond as well. And if we look at resistant hybrids, you can see we go from a 50 bushel difference between products down to 15 bushels. Here again, using genetics helps us in terms of reducing our disease losses and risks. And again, this is a good example. And those same products, whether the Deleros, the Miravis, the Veltima, the Headline Amps, Trivapros, also perform very well with the resistant variety. But again, the losses that you could lose with a resistant hybrid are less than what we see with the susceptibles. So take that in mind with your considerations this year. So what's the take home when it comes to tar spot? It's here. We know it's going to likely spread in Ontario as well as through the Midwest US continue. It's going to fall into, my gut feeling, it's going to fall into more like our typical white mold, Fusarium head blight, northern corn leaf blight, or gibberella and dawn. A lot of it's going to be driven by weather every year. It's something to be aware of, but please do not fear the disease. You know, scout your fields yourself, have your consultants. There's going to be lots of alerts out there as well. Pay attention to those weather and alerts out there to determine whether in-season management is required, whether it's for tar spot or northern corn leaf blight. Tracy and I do a lot of work with US colleagues. As we said, this corn IPM pipe has been established. Here, you can monitor it in real time, those maps. The Crop Protection Network, as Laura said, is another area, another site that has a lot of disease information as well available, Field Crop News, and then you can contact me directly as well. So that's the first one I wanted to quickly touch on. Soybean cyst nematode is another one. We see that across the province. Last year we added Simcoe to our list. Here we're starting, the past 2 days I've started to see soybean cysts on the roots. So it falls in line with that 4 to 5 weeks after planting when we first start to see it. Remember, they're very small, much smaller than what we see with the nodules. The big concern when it comes to soybean cyst nematode is that all of our eggs are in one basket, unlike what we said with tar spot and northern corn leaf blight, where we have genetic resistance, we have good fungicides for it. When it comes to soybean cyst nematode, this one source of resistance, this PI 88788, accounts for 95% of the varieties that you have available to you to fight off soybean cyst nematode. The other is Peking, and this is an example here in a field just not too far from where I'm sitting right here at home, is that where we've seen a change in the population. Where the 88788 varieties were very effective, it's no longer working, and you can see that with these strips in here where we have different levels of tolerance or resistance or of the 88788 versus the Peking source of resistance here with the blue arrows and that. So that is the big concern we have. I am seeing more fields like this with the PI 88788 source of resistance. This reminds me of when I started 30 years ago, where we had no resistance. And this is what we do not want to see. We're in better position than the US in many cases, but we're starting to creep up and we're starting to see more of the typical soybean cyst nematode injury in fields with that 88788 source of resistance. So keep that in mind. So as you're going into the season here, be aware of the soybean cyst nematode symptoms. Please, if you have to, please not only scout, dig up the plants, look for roots, but take soil samples. Know your numbers. If you haven't been doing it, you need to do that. So that can give you an indication of what's happening with the cyst nematode population in your field. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is your management working? And one of the other problems with cyst nematode is that SDS, sudden death syndrome, is a disease that follows or tags along with soybean cyst nematode, where you can go from these yellow spots to defoliation to significant yield loss. And it's this interaction that makes both these diseases more problematic in that. And just like with SCN, we see SDS tracking the same pathway. We have not seen it in Eastern Ontario yet, but cyst nematode is there, and SDS unfortunately will go there. We do have varieties available. So as you out there scouting, make note of the different varieties you may have and what you're seeing in symptoms. I've been doing screening for commercial varieties for the past 4 years or so. And trust me, what's in the book sometimes does not match what's going on in Ontario fields. And so that's an important thing to consider. Resistant varieties help us both in reducing the visual symptoms. We can see 60% or more reduction in visual symptoms and up to 15% or more increase in yield. So they do work very well. And if you tie those in with seed treatments, such as the Olivos, the Sultros, the SDS seed treatments, we can see up to a 10 bushel increase. So again, that integrated disease management program where you have genetics, crop protection products, cultural practices are key to managing these diseases. I get asked a lot about Olivo versus Sultro. Both these products are excellent for helping on the SDS side. This is just some of my work from from last year. Again, the Olivo, Sultro, better than our base fungicide treatment there as well, under higher cyst nematode and foliar disease. Remember, if you don't have SDS in that field, both the Olivo and Sultro aren't going to really give you that return on investment that you would want. The last one I want to touch on quickly is soybean cyst nematode. Yeah, Sclerotinia, white mold in here. It is right now, you probably will start seeing these aphids, these little mushrooms after the rains that we just had on there. They'll produce the spores that will infect the flowers. And again, just like with corn, timing is important. In this particular case for soybeans, we always see that first flower to full flower to early pod set, that R1 to the R3 time frame as being the most beneficial in terms of fungicide applications. And we've been doing work with Harrow, Owen Wally at Ag Canada, and looking at many of our white mold products, ranging from single modes of actions to multiple modes of actions. And we see that a lot of these products work very well against white mold, and primarily if they're in combination, or if we do this is under inoculated, high disease pressure, irrigated, where we see a return as well on double applications, one at that early flowering to that pod set. So those two applications under high disease pressure, two applications can be beneficial, although those products such as the Allegros, Cotigras, Stratego Pros that are good on white mold are very effective too as a single application at that good timing. So again, a lot of concern, a lot of questions around, is this the year for a double application for fungicides for soybeans because of the prices? And that, again, you're going to have to weigh it out to those individual fields where you'll see the greatest return on investment. So just a few other areas for more information. This has been really short and quick. And so cropprotectionnetwork.org, lots of good info there. Soybean cyst nematode coalition.org as well. Be out to look out for some forecasting, 2 for white mold spore buster, Sporecaster. They're on the Apple and Android platforms. A new one we're working with our US colleagues on for tar spot as well to assist. We have the OMAFRA Pub 812 Field Crop Protection Guide, which goes through all the different products and the different diseases and insects that Tracy and I will talk about in that. And I will pass that on, and I'm 2 minutes late, Tracy.
That's okay. Did you want to take questions, Laura? Okay.
Yeah, I'll let Marty or.
Yeah, sure. I didn't know whether we were moving on to Tracy or not, but yeah, Albert, I had a question for you. With the weather we've been noticing this year, it's been really variable. Probably more so, but especially today when you step outside and we had hot weather on the weekend. But any ideas what that does to the disease cycle? Is that a positive because it breaks a cycle because we not only got cold but we got hot, or does it make it worse because we have both conditions and diseases will start and then maybe pause until that weather is ideal again? What's your thoughts on that?
So. And it is beneficial and a hindrance. It all depends on the pathogen, right? And so in the condition. So if you think about something like Sundust syndrome we talked about, it likes cool, wet early. And we had those conditions at planting and that, then it like the hot, dry. And then we've had rain, cooler temperatures again. So that drives a lot of that. Sundust syndrome is caused by Fusarium virgiliforme, a fungal pathogen in the soil. It's a fungus, and it colonizes that taproot and that root within the first 2 weeks, and then it then develops and continues to colonize the taproot and produce a toxin that gives us those symptoms on there. It's the rain events that drive a lot more of that disease, so it will continue to develop. One of my test locations out here in West Lorne had 3 inches of rain a week and a half ago. So it'll be perfect for white mold, for SDS. And I know we're gonna see it. I'm already smiling about the amount that we will see out of that because those environmental conditions are key. The white mold is a good example too, where we always will see early on flowers will start to show that water soaking infection. Then it typically gets hot and dry, and we'll see the disease stop. And then if we get those rain events later, we'll see more white mold developing as long as flowering progresses. So it all depends on the diseases. There's those such as soybean cyst nematode that just doesn't care if it's hot, dry, cool, wet, it's still going to go about, do its business and that. And then as we saw in 2018 with Gibberella and Dawn, we had perfect conditions late post-silking where we had infections at silk, but then we had those continuous cooler, wetter conditions that allowed the disease not only to start and establish, but then to get worse and build up.
Bob, I see that you're unmuted. Do you have a question for Albert? Maybe not. Albert, I have a question for you on white mold. If you were going to target certain fields to get out and really scout and then possibly do a fungicide app, either for one app or two apps, what fields would you really be wanting to get in and have those applications on?
Yeah, so the same principles hold true for whether you're talking white mold or many of the other diseases as well. So you're going to be looking at crop rotation, right? So if you've got soybeans on soybeans, if you've got high plant populations, narrow rows, anything that can influence the microclimate within the canopy. When it comes to white mold, it's that canopy and that environment, particularly the humidity and the temperature within the canopy that drives that disease. So having a history of it, high plant populations are susceptible, although we don't have any real tolerant varieties, but a susceptible variety in there, and then that whole field history is critical to white mold. I'll show you a good example is a number of years ago, I was at a grower's field. He had white mold in there, but it was the oddest thing. It was in 2 rows all the way up, patterned through the field. It was just those 2 rows. The rest of the field was fine. What we found out was he had modified his planter to the point that there was only about 1.5 inches difference in those 2 rows, narrower than the rest, and that was enough to change that environment to drive the disease as well. So just think of it as a ladder and the rungs in the ladder. So the more risk factors, the greater potential of disease, but also potential control benefit in terms of, say, fungicides or other management tools.
Are there any other questions? We'll move on to Tracy.
Okay, thank you. See if it'll take it. Yep. That was good. Okay. Not sure what. So thanks everyone for coming, and I have to admit I had a hard time narrowing it down for the pests this year because it's been a pretty intense insect year from the get-go. So I am going to try and cover a few of them, but of course happy to take any questions on any of them that I haven't covered. First is, surprisingly, we're still dealing with some soil pests, and they're staying longer than typical. Part of that is because now we're back to moderate temperatures, and typically it's the hot, dry weather, the temperatures that drive, especially wireworm plants back down just to hide out and wait for the fall again. But a lot of factors have been playing into this, and it's not just an Ontario situation. We're seeing it across a lot of the Midwest too. But we've had a mild winter, and that allowed for insects to get active early. We had a few days or even a week there with the frost events that it really cooled things down. So the crop actually slowed down, but it was fine for the pests. They're still nice and warm in the soil. And then even dry conditions could have impacted some of the more water-soluble seed treatments that we use. And they only provide about 2 weeks worth of protection after planting. So once we're, if we plant in late April, early May, and then now we're deep into June, there's no product there protecting the crop anymore, so they're feeding. But really, I think it's also a sign that we're starting to see more organic matter building up in our soils and residue. And it's enabling and allowing those pests to lay eggs and thrive. But really, I think where we're going to have to go, and more so now, especially recognizing that it's a benefit to have soil health and cover crops and planting early, is to really focus on improving our monitoring. So some of that may be with sticky traps for seed corn maggot, or really paying attention to the growing degree days that we monitor for. And even, I know in some cases now with really heavy wireworm pressure in, for example, PEI, they monitor for the adults and collect as many click beetles as they can to kind of reduce that population. But also we are starting to see some more soil applied insecticides coming in, and even as promise of the biocontrol nematode work that Cornell University has been doing for alfalfa snout beetle and rootworm, it's looking to have activity on wireworm as well, which is good. But wireworm's interesting in particular because the what we would call the wireworm guru of Canada, just recently retired, had said, we've been having seed treatments like neonics and now diamides that don't really effectively, they don't control the pests. They just stun them or intoxicate them to stop them from feeding for a bit. So we never reduced their population. And back in the day when they used to use lindane, that product really worked. And he always expected it would take about 15 years of removing lindane from registration to get out of the soil profile enough to start seeing wireworm problems. And I think that his prediction may be correct in that now we're starting to see a lot more abundance in wireworm activity. So something to keep in mind. But I mentioned seed corn maggot. There may be a complex of flies that are closely related, one being seed corn maggot. And we may have to start monitoring for all of them. But if we look at actually, let's say, plant safe dates by monitoring growing degree days, you can actually start to predict if and when we may have an issue, or when it's better to plant or replant in some cases. So for example, if you start on January 1st and accumulate the number of, or accumulate the days that are above 3.9 degrees Celsius, and if you reach 200, that's when you see peak emergence of adults. So if you planted, for example, in this graph, May 8th, or earlier, you're in prime adult egg laying period. If you planted later in May 18th, a lot of those, in some areas, those peaks, adult emergence has passed, and you're actually closer to approaching when it's safe because the adults the larvae have gone into pupation. So there's no active feeding larva there to do any damage. And if we planted later into May 28th, you're actually really strongly into that period of safety. So we're really going to be focusing on monitoring growing degree days going forward, so that we can help target, especially in prone seed corn maggot areas, to when best time you're planting to help reduce that risk. But next I wanted to talk about, it's time to get our Western bean cutworm traps out. We've got almost 300 up already on the network, and not just Western bean. There's a number of traps going on, and if I can actually, if you humor me for a second, I can go to the live site and see actively all the traps that are there. We've had lots of true army traps up, and you pick a year after an outbreak to do the research, and they don't really show up again. Wouldn't you know it? But we do have quite a network now of monitoring here and in Manitoba as well. And there's lots of traps for corn borer and a black cutworm as well. And so we're going to start seeing, usually this is the time of year when Western bean traps start to go up, so that we can keep an eye and get a sense of what's going on in the landscape. So that was just kind of a heads up. Please get those up if you're intending to. The one exciting new one is the corn rootworm adult trap network. And so this network is starting up across pretty close to the entire rootworm area in North America. And we intend to monitor from silk stage of corn for 6 to 8 weeks, and get a sense of what Western corn rootworm and Northern corn rootworm are doing in all these regions, and hopefully maybe identify some problem areas where we may be seeing an overabundance of adults, especially in continuous corn acre areas where there could be more Bt resistance. And we're still looking for participants. So thankfully from GFO, the funding that they provided, we've actually got more traps to hand out for free if anyone is interested in actually monitoring. So I talked about a little bit, it involves putting a sticky trap, hang it onto the corn plant and check them and change them once a week. We're just looking to have 4 sticky traps up one row about 50 meters into the field and 50 meters apart. I've got lots of information on Field Crop News on those details and how to scout for it. And this is exciting. I'm gonna escape again just to show you the live. We actually have a new system that is, this is actually, you'll see it's similar to the Great Lakes and Maritime Pest Monitor Network because OMAFRA is actually taking all the data in so that we can map all the populations across the entire network. And I realize, GFO, your logo's not up there, that's coming. We're waiting for the Crop Life and the AbsTech group that's funded some of the traps for the US, so it's coming. But we will have maps for Western corn rootworm populations, if they'll let me show that. This is just primed with last year's data, so we can get, maybe it's not, my internet's not going to let that happen over Zoom. There we go. It's going to show how things are changing over time. And just like the Great Lakes, we have a dashboard where you can look at it across the various great region, but even, come on, this is a lot slower on Zoom. Even within, we will be able to go directly into, for example, Ontario, and see how the metrics change through the season of what activity is going on. So again, if you're interested in participating in this, please contact me, and I can get you some tracks, and we'll get them set up. So I showed you all this. I wanted to show it live. Another important thing is I'm really concerned about rootworm this year, in particular, given the reports of resistance that's taken place here in Ontario. So in any fields that have been planted with a below ground hybrid or BT rootworm hybrid and are starting to show indications of maybe lodging or goosenecking, or even if you want to get to do root digs, and you see clipping, please notify us, because it's an effort through the entire coalition, the Corn Pest Coalition, to collect these beetles and get them tested for resistance. Because I think I'm worried that we're going to underestimate how bad this can go south if we don't start to really manage these problem fields going forward. Promising thing is that we did get some sites with biocontrol nematodes established, especially in the Blythe area, where we had some issues, and as well a few sites in Eastern Ontario. So we're hoping to see how effective those are at knocking back our rootworm larvae and maybe minimizing some of the risks that we have in some of these known problem fields. So, but again, please report those to me. Back on resistance again, I think that's going to be a theme going forward for us in a lot of different crops and pests. I can say that we do have now dimethoate resistance here in Ontario, and most likely both in soybeans and in dry beans. And that is, of course, the only active we have registered in those two crops. It's known as Saigon or Lagon. We were noticing over the last few years how it seemed like conditions were ideal. So hot and dry, as soon as wheat is harvested, we tend to see mites moving over into the bean crops. And sometimes timing of applications weren't going on quickly. But in other cases, they would spray and they'd still have quite a bad problem Because sometimes we also say if there's a lot of eggs, which this product or this active doesn't work on, they're just going to start up a population again. But those samples were taken to Western University in Ag Canada and tested, and we do suspect resistance. So we have a project on that. Again, thankfully, some funding from GFO as well for this. So we are going to be monitoring and taking samples. So keep an eye out for spider mites. This is not what you want to see. When you get this kind of levels, you can lose up to 50% yield, especially in a year like this, where there are some serious pockets and regions that haven't seen much rain. Those plants are already stressed. So the threshold is 4 mites per leaflet until pod fill, so around R1 to R5. If it's going to rain, you hold off before you spray, because that rain can help start up, especially if there's moisture that stays in a closed canopy. It can start up some of the mite killing fungus. But really, if you can get spot treatment along the edges, first, if you see those incoming infestations, that's helpful. Level 1 and 2, it tends not to be economic, but once, and sometimes you can see these odd plants that are starting to color. A lot of the issue comes when people think that it's drought conditions or sandblasting. But really, when you turn over those leaves and look, there are tiny mites running around. So if you can spot treat this before the wind carries them further, that can delay significant infestation. But you definitely need to start managing it by this level 3 when you do start to see some pockets starting up, a few plants that may be really hindered, but for the most part, some are still quite green. You don't want to leave it till this level 4 because that's when we really have you've already lost yield, and it's almost impossible to successfully control them. But again, we have this project. So if you're scouting, and I know a few crop scouts are on this tonight, let us know if you have sites that even just before they're going to be sprayed, so we can go and get samples, but also any sites that they've been sprayed and you still have them. And again, we'll take them and test them. We're also testing against other products. So we're hoping to be able to find products that are still working on these populations so we can work towards getting those registered for control. Because sadly with spider mites, they are, across globally, they are resistant to hundreds of actives, which is problematic. So, and then finally, one more pest that I really wanted to be scouting for, because they're here, is soybean aphids. And it's a pest that we, back when it came in 2001, it was really bad. And then finally, natural enemies started to establish and know to go to soybeans much more regularly, so that it's more under control. We really haven't seen major soybean aphid issues in at least a decade. So fingers crossed that that's still going to happen this year, where the natural enemies are going to come into play. But I do suggest everyone go out and scout their early planted fields first, or fields known to be bordering buckthorn, and look and see. Again, for these temperatures, today's a little cool for them. Optimal temperatures have been what's been happening lately. Anything warmer really ends up causing them to stop reproducing it. But the hotter we get, the harder it is actually on the beneficials. So that's where we really have to pay attention. Just a reminder, because it has been a long time since we've had to think about it, but the thresholds still hold true and the timing still holds true. So you don't want to spray before you start to see the first flower on the plants. Any spraying before in B stages really sets you up for a problem. You're then on the treadmill of, you've knocked out all your beneficials. You never get 100% control of the aphids no matter what. And any aphids that are left build their populations back up literally within days. So it's best R1 until early R6. Late R5 is really when the 250 threshold comes into play. So Again, you monitor, every 3-4 days. If you see 250 per plant on 80% of the plants, go back one more time just to see, because I've many times seen that get knocked back down to 150. They can even fluctuate to 300-400. The real economic injury level is 660. So give the natural enemies some time to see. We also have, because I know it's not easy, we have the Aphid Advisor app to come in and help with that decision. It's free, so I will go through that. Now, there's a caveat to the threshold and that buffer that you have. If you're in a dry area like Eastern Ontario right now, and the plants are stunted and they're stressed, you don't want to go much past 250 because you really do need to knock off that stress. But if your soybeans just got like Albert 3 inches, and we're going to continue to see some rain and the soybeans fill and they're getting lush, you can hold off to close to 500 to see if those natural enemies come into play before you have to knock everything back. So there's a benefit there. But give those natural enemies a chance. And ladybird beetles or ladybug beetles and larvae in particular, I've seen lots of now. There's aphids in a lot of different crops and trees and the hort crops too. So they're going to be moving in. I mentioned the Aphid Advisor. It's free, developed from the research at Guelph, and it guides you through. So you just select your growth stage. It already automatically takes into consideration your location and the weather forecast and calculates the reproductive ability of aphids. Then we have a quick rapid speed. If you're seeing, this many on a leaflet, you click on that, or 250, it'll tell you if you need to spray or not. And if it goes into that, maybe you might, then that's when we start to ask you some specifics. How many you're seeing per plant? How many natural enemies are you seeing? And then it'll give you a final answer. So we're hoping that that's going to help guide and reduce misapplications, or even just give you that, little voice that helps you guide you through, especially if you see a lot of natural enemies. The app will help you help determine if there's enough of those natural enemies to knock the population back. So of course, you know how to reach me. Albert went through lots of those resources, but I'm happy to take any questions because I know there's lots of different insect issues out there.
Hi, Tracy, I'll jump in. I was wondering about aphids.
Hey.
I've heard rumors already this season that people across the province are seeing aphids. Just wondered, is that normal, or is it because we planted soybeans earlier this year, plants are more developed, so we're seeing aphids maybe earlier? Just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
It's a little bit of both, yes. There's a lot of early planted soybeans. So anything that came in from the States or came off of buckthorn would have gone to those fields. Now, that's not a bad thing because typically they want to leave early planted soys and go to later planted soys mid-season so they can continue their development longer. So we may see, and I don't know if you remember, but back in the day when you literally see them flying, they'd build wings and start to leave and colonize other fields. So they do start in pockets, and you'll see, you may find 1,000 on a plant loaded, but a few meters away, nothing. So they will slowly start to spread themselves out and dilute themselves. The other thing is we had a mild winter. So any of those eggs that were on buckthorn, they did well. So now and one more, dry conditions don't allow for the fungus to really get going and help knock that population back. So now that we're starting to see some timely rains, sorry for those who haven't gotten those, because I know there are, that can help bring that into play too. So fingers crossed. But it is a great aphid year. My hort counterparts are in trouble with some of their crops too. So yeah.
Be on the lookout.
Yeah, be on the lookout.
Tracy, I see we have a couple comments here. Dan Van Eck says that he can help with some traps in the Glencoe, Tupperville area if needed. Dan, I'm not sure
Awesome.
which traps. I didn't see when your message came in.
Probably the rootworm.
I would think so,
trap.
but just, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and he's nodding from the field there. So,
Yes, yeah, I see that now. Awesome. Okay, I will be in touch.
okay. And then Bruce,
And-
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I see that. Are stink bugs an issue in soys anywhere? Typically not yet. They tend to move into soybeans once you start to have pods. So that's when you really have to worry about stink bugs. So if you're thinking about the brown marmorated stink bug in particular, surprisingly, that is not establishing in our field crops yet, though it's well established across Ontario in homes. So they're there. There's something going on. Again, you put some research into monitoring for it, and they don't show up in the crops. So, but keep an eye, because once we start to get into R2, R3, start to see some seeds they're developing, they're going to try and move in if I suspect, especially if other crops are well advanced.
I see that Robert has been. Sorry. Go ahead, Tracy.
I was going to say, and now going back to the aphid thing, just remembered, we're going to be approaching wheat harvest soon. And again, wheat tends to be a nursery for some of our natural enemies because we tend to have aphids there at lower levels. So typically once wheat harvest starts, the natural enemies will be moving into the other crops. So we'll probably see those in higher numbers too in soybeans very soon.
I see Robert here is saying that there's very low numbers but widespread aphids from Listowel to Walkerton. One question that I had, Tracy, about aphids as well is with the insecticides that we have available currently on the market, is there any concerns with resistance, or is that still something that's quite far out?
Thankfully, not as much as in the States, and even there it's been hit and miss. Mainly again because we've had a good few years of not having to spray them. So there's been a bit of a rest period there. So as far as I know, our products are still effective. Of course, managing and rotating those products, because now we have quite a list that are registered on soybeans, which is good. Rotate them, because that'll help reduce the risk. We're fortunate we've got different ones that even in the US they don't have. They tend to really heavily rely on some, like pyrethroids, or some that we don't have either. So fingers crossed that we don't receive enough of those populations to cause a problem.
That's good. I see Carrie's got a question here. Is there an economic threshold established for thrips for the vegetative stage and reproductive stage of corn?
Nope, no. There is not. Thrips are becoming a problem. I know Deb Campbell's got issues in wheat, but there's no thresholds. Now that's I shouldn't say that completely. There's barley thrips that have thresholds, but barley thrips are really focused on barley. They want barley. There are some grain thrips that tend to be in wheat, and European thresholds are much higher than what is established for barley. Soybeans, there is varying thresholds, but again, it's usually younger crop, and nothing for corn. Again, it is super rare that they can do this. So it is something that we need to start to really pay attention to. There's something driving that, whether it's nutrient deficiencies because of added stress from especially drought, for example, or and that's why collecting samples would be great to get them ID'd through the diagnostic lab, so we know what species we're dealing with, because then we can also determine if there's other neighboring crops that are influencing these populations too. And also if they're going to be resistant, because if they're more something that can be on a hort crop and they're exposed to a lot of different actives, then that limits our choices too. So yeah, but I can spend hours looking through lit review and get 3 papers at best. So it's very frustrating. Yeah.
Tracy, I was wondering about the corn rootworms, and intriguing that nematodes are going to be able to be used. There's a special type of nematode that's coming from Cornell that you're studying, and they can be used on the field. They're sprayed on, and that's how they're applied. I was just wondering, what's the timing of spraying, and when are they actually effective? And it's kind of neat that they actually will be effective for many, many years afterwards. But how soon? Like if you notice the problem, you diagnose it, can you really use that in that year, or is it really the following year that you have to apply those nematodes?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the limitation for in corn applications is really the corn plant, because if you're going to spray, you have to ensure that you're using drop nozzles to get down right to the soil. Otherwise, you're losing a lot of the nematodes onto the canopy, and they won't make it to the soil. So we tend to try and say, you know, V4, V5 at the latest in the spring. That said, they can also be applied in manure. So they've had success in New York where they apply it in their manure in the fall or early spring, as long as soil temperatures around 7 C, and see it effective that way. It tends to take about a year for them to really kick in. So they've got to build up their populations a bit, find the rootworm, and start to increase in numbers. But they typically see in the year after application some success in keeping, it's not going to be full control, but it keeps it at a suppressing level that then you can go in and still use resistant hybrids that they are resistant to and see a lot less damage to them. But he is he's had great success with alfalfa snout beetle, and that can be applied anytime really in the crop. And then now, as I mentioned, they're seeing really positive results with wireworm. So yeah, there's opportunity there. It's another tool in our toolbox when we're losing some of these other options.
Tracy, a question from Mike. With the potential for double cropping soybeans following the wheat harvest this year, should we be on the field on extra watch for aphids in those fields?
Yes, so potentially, obviously it's not soybean aphids going into those fields, but early planted wheat can be prone to fall infestations of cereal aphids. So it will be something to monitor. That said, if it's a good aphid year in general, there may be natural enemies that can move in and help with the fall crop too. But yeah, we're always more prone, the earlier we plant, to aphids coming in.
Okay, I've also had a question come in here for Albert. Wondering, do growers who are growing non-GMO IP beans, do they have to pay more careful attention to SCN or SDS in their fields than GMO beans?
Yes, they do in that regards. In terms of the resistant sources, there's not as many available ones with the PI 88788 source of resistance in some cases with the IP. And also on the SDS side, we're just looking at those in some of our trials and the companies as well in terms of getting a better handle on the resistance tolerance levels within those as well. So yes, check with your provider in that, and you know, in that case, it's often best to utilize, you know, more than just one variety in those IP markets as well, right? Because the more genetics, the more spread you have, the better potential you have to not put all your eggs in one basket in those regards as well.
Sounds good, thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions? If so, feel free to post them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask them to either Tracy or Albert. I know they're both very easy to get a hold of for answering questions too, so that's always a great benefit.
Dan has his hand up. I don't know if he's waving or he's going to ask you a question. You have to unmute though, Dan.
There you go. I just figured it out. It's the first time on the phone doing this. So my question is, now we have Viptera and Duracade. Tracy, what's your opinion on how much time it's going to take to develop resistance to that? It's not going to take very long. Yeah. They already have it resistant in the US, and there are signs potentially of concern here even. So now is that because again, no, the Viptera is for above ground. It's the Duracade part that's for rootworms. So are you talking about
Are you talking about rootworm or Western bean cutworm?
Both now.
Okay. So, so far, Vectera is holding up for Western bean cutworm.
Okay.
However, the research from Ridgetown, actually, Jasmine and Jocelyn's work shows that it's really only the very young larvae that are very susceptible. And as those larvae get bigger, they are more tolerant. And so you can imagine any survivors that move on to more plants can survive that, then they can build that resistant population up. So it's, you know, it's something just to keep an eye out for. For rootworm, sadly, yeah, they're still close enough relation to the other proteins that it's already developed resistance to that it won't take very long. It actually found it before it was fully, they found it in the US resistant before it was fully launched. It was already resistant.
Okay. I was just curious because now we're coming out with Tricepta and with these new trait or new hybrids with these traits in them. So.
Yep. So it's something to really pay attention and use these products and traits for your pest of concern, but also rotate where possible or change up the management tool where possible so that we keep those tools.
Right. Okay. No, well, thank you very much, Tracy.
Seems to be a discussion on the chat. Okay.
Laura,
I just didn't even have time. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Laura, just one more comment on the food grade side. If you go to the Ontario Soybean and Canola Committee, the gosoya.ca website, the food grade lists all those varieties that have some SCN tolerance in there as well, or resistance.
That's perfect. Thanks so much for sharing that, Albert. Yeah, lots of conversation in the sidebar, which is great. That's what these are meant to be for, is to combine all of our knowledge together. So if there are no other questions, and if there are, wave your hands, unmute quickly, or post a question. But I'm going to post the CEU sheet here, and for the CCAs to scan. And but yeah, if there's any other questions, we'll stay online for another couple minutes. If there are, please feel free to ask. And if not, thank you so very much to Tracy and Albert for joining us tonight, and also to Marty, Mike, and Paige from GFO for helping organize this event. And thanks to all of you for joining. It's just so appreciated to see everybody's names, their faces on the screen, and to hear what you're experiencing out in the field. It's really good to have that resource. So thanks so much.